No. Word landed like a dropped wrench on the concrete floor of Whitmore Precision Auctions, and every head in the room turned. Theodora Mensah had said it quietly. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stepped forward or made any kind of scene. She had simply looked at the man who'd just told her she wasn't allowed to inspect the movement of the Patek Philippe pocket watch in Lot 47, and she had said no. The man was Clifford Ashe. Not Mr. Ashe, not Sir, just Clifford, because that was what it said on the placard beside the private booth he'd reserved for the evening, and because a man who flew in from Calgary on a private charter to buy a single watch at a Toronto auction didn't need a title to make you feel small. Was 61 years old, silver-haired in the way that money makes silver hair look intentional. And he had spent the last 20 minutes making it very clear, to everyone in earshot, that he knew more about vintage horology than anyone in this room. Had not, until this moment, noticed Theodora. Was 28. She was wearing a dark green jacket that had belonged to her father, slightly too wide at the shoulders, and she was holding a jeweler's loupe in her left hand the way some people hold a pen, like it had always been there, like it was part of her hand. She had arrived early, signed in under Mensah Watch Consulting, and spent 40 minutes examining every piece on the preview table before Clifford had walked in with his 2 associates and his very loud opinions. Clifford looked at her now, the way certain men look at things that confuse them, with a kind of narrowing, a recalibration. "I'm sorry," he said. "Movement," Theodora said. "I'd like to examine it." The handler said Lot 47 was available for close inspection until 7. "I've already examined it," Clifford said. He smiled, but it didn't reach anything. "It's fine, beautiful piece." "I'm sure it is. I'd still like to see it." One of his associates, a younger man in a fitted suit, leaned toward Clifford and murmured something. Clifford's smile shifted into something that wasn't quite amusement. "Are you here on behalf of a buyer?" he asked. "I'm the buyer," Theodora said. There was a pause. Clifford looked at the loupe. He looked at the jacket. He looked at the preview sheet she was carrying, which had small handwritten notes in the margins. Not the kind of notes you make when you're reading about something, but the kind you make when you already know the answer and you're just confirming it. "What's your budget?" he asked. Just like that, no preamble. The room had gotten quieter. Not silent. There were still people by the far table. Still a murmur from near the drink station. But the particular patch of air around Lot 47 had gone still. Theodora did not answer the question. She looked at the handler, a young woman named Petra, who had been standing by the display case with an increasingly uncertain expression. "May I?" Theodora said. Opened the case. Clifford laughed. It came out shorter than he'd probably intended. "You know these things go for 140, 160 at estimate. This isn't a fashion accessory." "I know what it is," Theodora said. She lifted the watch carefully, turned it over, and brought the loupe to her eye. 20 seconds of silence. Haggart, 30. Then Theodora set the watch back down on its cushion and looked at Clifford Ashe. "The rotor bearing on the movement has been replaced," she said. "Not recently. I'd guess sometime in the late 90s. The replacement is period appropriate and the work is competent, but it's not original. Whoever cataloged this listed it as unrestored." Clifford's smile had stopped entirely. "That affects the estimate," Theodora said simply. "I'll be speaking to the auction coordinator before the opening." The younger associate in the fitted suit had his phone out. The other one was looking at the floor. Clifford Ashe said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Where did you say you were from?" Theodora tucked the loupe into her jacket pocket, her father's jacket pocket, and picked up her preview sheet. "I didn't," she said. Her father, Emmanuel Mensah, had worked for 31 years out of a shop on Danforth Avenue in East Toronto, Mensah and Sons, the sign said, though Emmanuel had only daughters, two of them, and he had never once considered changing the name because, as he told anyone who asked, the name was there when he bought the shop, and it was there when Theodora started working the counter at age 9, and it would be there long after him. He was a watchmaker, not a hobbyist, not an enthusiast. A watchmaker in the precise and exacting sense of the word. He had trained in Accra under a man who had trained in Geneva, and he believed truly and without irony that a mechanical watch was one of the most honest things a human being could make with their hands. He had given Theodora her first loupe when she was 11, not a toy one, a real one, 10x magnification, the kind jewelers use. He had sat her down at the workbench, placed a broken Omega in front of her, and said, "Look at it until you understand what's wrong." Had looked at it for 2 hours. When she found the cracked mainspring, she had felt something shift in her chest that she still couldn't name. Not pride exactly, more like recognition. Like the watch had been waiting for her to see it. Emmanuel died of a stroke in the middle of a Tuesday, 3 years ago now, with a 19th century French carriage clock open on his bench and a cup of tea going cold beside him. He had been 63 years old. He had been healthy, or so they'd thought. Theodora had closed the shop for 2 weeks. Then she'd reopened it. She hadn't become a watchmaker because her father was one. She'd become one because she was one. Because it was in her the way certain things are in people, woven through without announcement. But she thought about him every time she picked up a loupe. She thought about the particular way he'd held a movement up to the light, tilting it with one finger, looking for things other people missed. She thought about him that evening, after the auction, walking back along King Street with the night air cold off the lake. She hadn't bought Lot 47. She'd spoken to the coordinator, the listing had been amended, the estimate had dropped. Clifford Ashe had bought it anyway, at $112,000 rather than $140, and had not looked at her as he left. That was fine. That wasn't the point. The point was what her father had told her, over and over, standing at that workbench on Danforth. The watch always tells the truth. You just have to know how to listen. A call came 6 weeks later. It was from a woman named Lavinia Drummond. "Mrs. Lavinia Drummond," she said, in the way that people say Mrs. when it means something to them, who had gotten Theodora's number from the Whitmore auctions coordinator. She had a collection. Her late husband had assembled it over 50 years. She needed someone to assess it. "What kind of collection?" Theodora asked. "A serious kind," Lavinia said. House was in Rosedale. Of course it was in Rosedale. It was one of those houses that looks modest from the street. Red brick, tall trees, a flagstone path, and then opens up inside into room after room of very quiet, very expensive things. Lavinia Drummond was 74, small, white-haired, with the posture of a woman who had once been told her posture was poor, and had decided definitively to never hear that again. Met Theodora at the door herself and led her through a hallway lined with framed architectural drawings to a sitting room at the back of the house. There were 3 other people already seated. One of them was Clifford Ashe. Theodora recognized him immediately. He recognized her a half-second later, and something moved across his face. Surprise, and then something else. "Oh, good," Lavinia said. "You know each other." "Met," Clifford said. "Been in the same room," Theodora said pleasantly. Lavinia introduced the others. Her nephew, a man named George, who worked in commercial real estate and had the look of someone deeply uncomfortable with silence, and a woman named Fen Bartholomew, who was apparently the family solicitor and who was taking notes on a slim yellow legal pad. "My husband collected watches," Lavinia said, sitting down and folding her hands with a kind of deliberate calm. 61 pieces. Assembled over 50 years, he was not a casual collector. She looked at Theodora. He knew what he was doing. "I'd like to believe that," Clifford said, with a warmth that was almost convincing. "But values shift. Provenance matters more than it used to. I've been working with collections of this kind for." "Mr. Ashe," Lavinia said, "I know what you've been doing. I know what everyone in this room does." She looked at Theodora again. "I asked you here because Petra, at Whitmore, told me what happened with the Patek. She said you found something in 30 seconds that the cataloger missed." "Plenty," Theodora said then. "I wasn't counting." Lavinia almost smiled. "My husband would have liked that answer." George shifted in his chair. "Aunt Lavinia, I really think we should be looking at a range of—" "George," Lavinia said, and George stopped. He stood and led them down a hallway to a closed door. She opened it. The room beyond was not large, but it was exact. A single long display case ran along one wall, glass-topped, climate-controlled, lit from beneath with a cool, even light that made each watch look like it was sitting in its own small world. There were shelves on the opposite wall, not displaying anything, just organized. Tools, reference books, a magnification stand, small archive boxes labeled in handwriting that must have been her husband's. 61 watches. Theodora stood in the doorway for a moment and did not say anything. "Well," Clifford said, stepping past her and moving to the case, "I've had a look at the catalog your husband kept. Based on that alone, I can give you a preliminary figure." "I haven't shown anyone the catalog," Lavinia said. "Heard," Clifford paused. "It was with my husband's papers, which are private." There was no heat in her voice. It was simply a fact delivered. George coughed. Fenn kept writing. "I'd like to open the case," Theodora said. She looked at Lavinia. "With your permission." Lavinia nodded. The case was locked with a small brass mechanism, the kind that looked decorative but wasn't. Theodora examined it for a moment, then looked at the shelf of tools. She found a slim probe, checked the keyway, and said, "Do you have the key?" "We're looking for it," George said. "It may have been with the—" "Never mind," Theodora said. She set down the probe. She looked at the lock again. She reached into her jacket, her father's jacket, and took out a small fold of tools that she carried the way other people carry a wallet. She selected one, angled it, and applied the gentlest possible pressure to the mechanism. 19 seconds. Yes, the lock opened. No one in the room said anything for a moment. "Or father's?" Lavinia asked quietly. Theodora looked up. "Sorry?" "Jacket. It's a man's jacket." Theodora looked down at the wide shoulders, the worn cuffs. "Yes." "I thought so." Lavinia looked at the open case. "My husband used to say you can tell everything about a watchmaker by how they open a stuck case." "What did he say you should look for?" "Patience," Lavinia said, "and knowing when not to force it." Clifford spent the next hour doing what Clifford did, moving through the collection with a confidence that was, Theodora had to admit, not entirely unearned. He knew watches. He'd been buying and selling them for decades. He knew the names, the references, the rough market values. He could hold a piece and tell you its lineage with reasonable accuracy. What he couldn't do, or wouldn't, she wasn't sure which, was slow down. Moved from piece to piece in the case the way certain people move through museum galleries, absorbing enough to speak about it later, but not enough to really see it. He'd pick up a watch, turn it over, set it down. 20 seconds, 30, move on. Theodora worked differently. She started at the left end of the case and did not rush. For the first watch, a 1930s Longines, doctor's model, small seconds at 6, she spent 4 minutes. She examined the dial, the hands, the case back, the crown. She compared the serial number against a reference in her head. She made a note on a small card she'd brought, in handwriting that was very small and very precise. And George watched her for a while and then went to stand near the door. Clifford watched her for longer. "You're not going to get through all 61 tonight," he said, at about the 40-minute mark. "I know," Theodora said. She did not look up. "Family needs a figure soon. There's an estate timeline." I understand. That's what I'm saying is." "I know what you're saying," Theodora said. She lifted the 10th watch, a 1967 Heuer Carrera, and held it to the light. She tilted it once, twice, held very still. "Mr. Ash, this one has a replaced pusher's assembly. The screws don't match the period." She set it down and made a note. "I'm making sure Mrs. Drummond has accurate information. That's what I was asked here for." Clifford looked at the watch, looked at her notes. "Heuer is still valuable," he said, slightly differently than before. "Of course it is," Theodora said. "I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying it's been serviced extensively, and that should be reflected in the valuation." She moved to piece 11. "There's a difference between a watch that's been cared for and a watch that's been altered. Both have value, but they don't have the same value." Lavinia, who had been sitting in a chair by the window the entire time, turned a page of the book she was reading and said nothing. All the time they broke for tea, Lavinia insisted. And it was not a suggestion. Theodora had gone through 23 pieces. She had flagged 4 with condition issues, found 2 with exceptional provenance details that the original catalog had understated, and identified one, a small, plain-faced Swiss pocket watch in a worn silver case, that she had looked at for a very long time without saying anything. Sat in the kitchen. Lavinia poured. George took a call outside. Fen went over her notes. Clifford sat across from Theodora and looked at his phone and then, eventually, put it away. "Pocket watch," he said, near the end of the 3rd shelf. S. Spent a while on it. S. 8. He waited. "It's not the most valuable piece in the collection," Theodora said, not remotely, "but it's the most interesting." She held her tea with both hands. "It's a Galopin Freres, mid-1880s, Geneva. Small house, not widely documented. The case is worn because it was actually carried, as a working watch, not a display piece. There are initials engraved inside the case back. Someone wore this every day of their life." Sentiment doesn't affect value," Clifford said. "Oh," Theodora agreed, "but provenance does. If we could trace who wore it, where it came from, a watch that was carried by someone specific, documented, that adds a layer that matters to serious collectors." "I'd need documentation." "No." She looked at the table. "I'd like to try." Clifford studied her for a moment. Then he said, more quietly than she'd expected, "You're not here to compete with me." "Oh," Theodora said. "And what are you here for?" Thought about her father. She thought about the workbench on Danforth, the cold cup of tea, the carriage clock open on the felt. She thought about being 11 years old and looking at a broken Omega for 2 hours until something clicked. "Same thing you are," she said. "I just take longer." Came back 2 more evenings. Each time Lavinia let her in herself. Each time the kitchen smelled like the same tea. George stopped attending after the first return visit. Fen came once more and then sent an assistant. Clifford did not come back. He sent a written valuation, professional, thorough, accurate, within a reasonable margin, which Lavinia read and set on the side table without comment. On the 3rd evening, Theodora finished the last watch in the case, made her final note, and sat with Lavinia in the room with the display case and the reference books and the small archive boxes in her husband's handwriting. "Taught himself," Lavinia said. "Owen, he had no formal training. He just fell in love with them and kept learning until he understood them." "It shows," Theodora said. "The collection is coherent. He wasn't just acquiring, he was building something." Lavinia was quiet for a moment. "He used to say that a watch is a little piece of someone's attention. All those hours of thought and precision, locked into something you can hold in your palm." She looked at the case. "I don't want to sell all of it." Don't have to. George thinks I should. Dora looked at the Galopin Freres in its place on the third shelf. What does the solicitor think? N thinks I should do what I want. N do what you want. Lavinia turned and looked at her fully for the first time all evening. You found the pocket watch's owner, she said. It was not a question. Theodora reached into her bag and took out a folded piece of paper, printed, but with handwritten notes in the margins. A pharmacist in Quebec City, 1887 to 1931. His name was in a Galopin service record I found through an archive in Geneva. They kept meticulous records, which is part of why I wanted to trace it. His daughter emigrated to Ontario in the 1940s, and she paused. I can't complete the chain to your husband, but it's close. Lavinia took the paper. She read it slowly. Something in her face moved. Not grief exactly, more like recognition, the same shift Theodora had felt at 11 years old looking at the broken Omega, the feeling of something finally becoming visible. Owen found it at an estate sale, Lavinia said quietly. In Kingston, 1974. He paid $11 for it. She folded the paper along its original crease. He always thought it had a story. It does. Would have liked you, Lavinia said. Then, he would have argued with you endlessly, but he would have liked you. Dora smiled. My father was the same way. The room was quiet. Outside, the Rosedale street held its particular silence, the kind that old money buys, thick with trees and distance. The 61 watches sat in their case, each one carrying its small cargo of someone's time and attention and care. I'll give you a full written assessment by Thursday, Theodora said, with my recommendations for what to sell, what to keep, and what to investigate further. The Galopin I'd keep. The Hoyer, too, actually. The restoration is honest work, and it's beautiful. And Clifford's valuation is probably within 10% on most pieces. He's good at what he does. Theodora picked up her bag. He just doesn't slow down enough. Lavinia walked her to the door. At the threshold, she paused. Lock on the case, she said. Where did you learn to do that? Dora looked down at the jacket. The shoulders still slightly too wide, the cuffs still slightly worn. My father, she said. He used to say a locked case isn't refusing you, it's just waiting for you to ask correctly. She said goodnight, and walked out into the cool Toronto evening. The kind where the stars don't quite make it through the light pollution, but the air carries the faint smell of lake water from the south, and the city hums with the ordinary business of people carrying their small and irreplaceable things from one day into the next. There are 61 watches in that Rosedale house, each one a piece of someone's attention, and tonight, for the first time in 3 years, every single one of them has been truly seen. I keep thinking about that locked case. Not the 19 seconds. That part doesn't matter, not really. What matters is the year before it, the decade before it. Every hour Theodora spent at that workbench on Danforth, not because someone told her to, but because she couldn't stop herself. Because some people are built that way, pulled toward the thing they love the way water finds its level, quietly, without announcement. Clifford walked into that room already certain of what he'd find. He'd done it 100 times before. He had the vocabulary, the credentials, the decades of deals behind him. And he wasn't wrong about the watches. He knew them. But knowing something and truly seeing it are not the same thing. And I think that's the part that gets missed in stories like this. We talk about the moment someone is proven right, the dramatic turn, the room going quiet. Don't talk about all the ordinary days that made that moment possible. Manuel Mensah gave his daughter a loupe at 11 and told her to look until she understood. That's it. That's the whole inheritance. Not money, not connections, not a name that opened doors. Just the habit of attention, passed from one pair of hands to another, and Theodora carried it. Through the 2 weeks, she closed the shop, and then the morning she opened it again, through every auction preview, and every stubborn lock, and every room where someone looked at her jacket and decided they already knew what she was worth. That's what I think about when people ask what it takes. It isn't talent alone. Talent without character is just noise. It isn't persistence alone either, because you can persist in the wrong direction for a very long time. Theodora had was all three things working together: the integrity to say what she saw, even when it cost someone a sale, the genuine knowledge that came from years of slow and honest work, and the steadiness to keep going through every room that told her she didn't belong there. Those things compound, quietly, invisibly, the way interest compounds. Until one evening you're standing in a Rosedale collection room, and a 74-year-old woman is handing you a folded piece of paper and saying, "My husband would have liked you," and you realize that's not a small thing. That's everything. Galopin Frere's pocket watch sat in its case for decades before Theodora looked at it. A pharmacist in Quebec City carried it every day of his life, and then it passed through hands and years, and an estate sale in Kingston, where Owen Drummond paid $11 for it, and always believed it had a story. It did. It just needed someone who knew how to listen. I think that's true of most things worth finding.